I didn't get anything that told me what to read or anything.
Oh, hi, Cindy. Hi, Dan. Oh,
Good morning.
Good morning.
Are you ready to talk about LBJ?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together, and then we'll get into it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu So much to talk about here. So much to talk about here. Let me just start by asking people for their general reactions to this chapter on LBJ. How did you find it? How does it compare for you to the other chapters that we read about Lincoln and FDR and Teddy Roosevelt? And what were some salient points that emerged for you from this? Dottie. If you can unmute Dottie. Still can't hear you, Dottie.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. No, I was just so impressed. I read it twice. I could not believe the fortitude this man had. First of all, I considered him a Southerner. And the only thing I felt bad from the first was the fact that he had this thing that he didn't go to an Ivy League school, but what he did and what he believed, the Great Society, I thought was fabulous. And of course, what happened was Vietnam, I think, destroyed him and ruined him. When he made that last speech after being 1 year after John Kennedy died and then a full term, that he was not going to run again, it broke his heart. And that wasn't his thing, but what he accomplished, the things that John Kennedy had started, and John Kennedy was more focused on international relations, but to think that what he did, the Great Society with the civil rights alone and how he did it, I thought was amazing. I never knew to what extent and how much work it took. No wonder he died.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful way to launch this conversation. Just to note, what I found so powerful about this chapter, I mean, we all contain multitudes, but LBJ really contained multitudes. Domestic LBJ was just a master, and domestic LBJ, according to Doris Kearns Goodwin's treatment, got more done and got more done quickly. In less than 2 years, he passed the tax cut, he passed Civil Rights Act, he passed education, he passed Medicare, right? He passed civil rights and then voting rights. And he got, you know, on the day, I remember he
Your phone. Yes.
Yeah, that, can folks mute if you're not speaking? If everyone can mute who's not speaking. She has this evocative vignette that on the night that JFK was assassinated, he sat in his pajamas with 3 advisors and dreamed up what he would love to accomplish. And all of that, the tax cut, civil rights, voting rights, education, and then Medicare was done with it before 2 years. And just so accomplished. And then that the same person who was such a master was such a disaster, such a master, such a disaster on the foreign policy, and that he could be both master and disaster. That was unique to LBJ. So Dottie, thank you for that. Other points, Bruce.
I wonder, I was trying to find some copy of the very first speech he gave to the joint houses of Congress. Because reading the description in the book, I think it must have been a real wower and maybe a little longer than the Gettysburg Address, but I think as powerful. Has anybody been able to find that on YouTube? Because I think
yeah, actually, Bruce. Yeah, Bruce. There's a there's a New York Times columnist named Farji Manjot or something like that, who wrote over a piece within the last 4 or 5 months about living in historical times. And he talks about, this columnist talked about how hard current times are when he wrote it. And he said he finds it very comforting to go back. And his article was embedded with a bunch of speeches from LBJ, including the first one where LBJ addresses the joint house and says, "I would give anything that I had not to be here right now."
Mhm.
It's a click away. Plus that speech that he gave, which ended with "We shall overcome," which prompted Congress to pass the Civil Rights, not the Civil Rights, but the Voting Rights Act in '65. All of that stuff is a click away. So again, what a tale of multitudes, that he could do that and then fail so abysmally with Vietnam. Marilyn. Marilyn, you're muted, my friend. You're still muted, Marilyn. Okay, well, while they're figuring that out.
Okay.
Oh, not there. Okay.
I'm not sure everybody is aware that she had a personal relationship with LBJ. She
Yeah.
worked for him as an intern in the White House. And then after he left the White House, she helped him compile his memoirs.
Yes. Yeah, and
So-
she talks about that in the in the first chapter, right? That she worked for him, etc. What did you think about her description? So, and therefore, to your point, Marilyn, she really knows him very well, and she could describe him with an immediacy,
Yes.
with an urgency, with granularity that made that chapter really come alive. Like when she was talking about his theory of the case for working with Congress, and how he had every congressperson and senator to the White House within a certain period of time, and these dinners for 30 people at a time, and they would wine and dine, and then he would drink port and scotch with the men, and the women would go off with Lady Bird. And just the fact that he said that in order to work effectively with Congress, you have to basically have an incestuous relationship with him. I mean, she's able to just capture what a master he was on that end, because she knew him.
It made me wonder whether Biden, having spent so many years in the Senate, would utilize some of this, the same methods to cajole his adversaries.
From your mouth to God's ears.
Yeah.
Right. In other words, it's about relationships. Let's talk about that for a second, because I thought that was, did anyone want to talk about, his relationship with senators that he disagreed with, and what struck you about that? Anyone want to point to that?
Oh, yes.
I love some voices of folks who hadn't shared. In other words, because of the granularity and her closeness to the detail, she's able to talk about his conversations with Richard Russell, and they were on opposite ends of really important issues like civil rights constantly. Everett Dirksen, who was the Republican leader of the Senate, and he was able to get Everett Dirksen support for a lot of his legislation. What struck you about those relationships that she's able to convey? Annette Needle.
Well, he didn't shy away from them. He was there. He treated them with the same approaches and time that he needed to with his, those who were on his side. And he thought about what they needed, not just what he needed, what they would need and how he would work towards that with them. even when he decided that certain things needed to be signed, when he went to Truman, when they needed to sign, really put other people there and first and thought about that.
Yeah.
I'm talking domestically.
Yeah, like that conversation that he had with Richard Russell when he was trying to end the filibuster that would get the Civil Rights Act passed in '64. I love you. I'm only here because of you. You're my teacher. You're my mentor, and you better get out of the way on civil rights. Otherwise, I'm gonna roll over you. Right? Just like a really honest, and somehow they're able to disagree and love each other at the same time. But Annette, I think that the way he was so people smart, like with Everett Dirksen, I mean, she doesn't quote this, but I had always heard this. I think this must have come from Roger Caro. It's better to have somebody inside your tent pissing out than outside your tent pissing in. Was an LBJism. She doesn't quote it, but I think Caro quotes it. And the way he tried to get Dirksen and others inside the tent, just people smart. So here's my question for you. And she doesn't really, she indicates that she gestures towards this, but doesn't get at the heart of it. Here's my question. How could the same person who was so people smart and so effective and so singularly genius with the domestic agenda be just the opposite with Vietnam War? How can the same person be both dramatically successful and dramatically unsuccessful at the same time in the same person? Any thoughts on that? To me, that's like the $64,000 question of LBJ. Paul Kalis.
Yes, I believe that in using current day parlance, he did not want to be seen as a loser. And this idea of not losing was inherent in that war. And he did everything possible. You know, when I hear people today talk about the light at the end of the tunnel regarding COVID, I get a little nervous because this light at the end of the tunnel was used as an excuse to keep going in terms of war. So
I think you're, yeah, Paul, I think you're right. But a question that I have about that, I mean, if Doris Kearns Goodwin were here, this is the question I would ask her. She points out, I mean, you're absolutely right. The question that it begets another why question. When it came to the domestic agenda, he got outside voices. He said the usual voices are not commensurate to our domestic problems. We need to get outside thinkers and think outside the box. And when it came to the domestic agenda, to your point, he was so worried about losing Vietnam and what would it mean if we lost Vietnam, and he didn't seek outside voices of people who said actually it would not be such a horrible thing if we lost Vietnam, and just new ways. And he never opened himself to other ways to see it. And that my question is, why is that?
Well, he did not feel comfortable going up against the so-called experts in this particular case. And the experts were the generals. And the generals kept saying, light at the end of the tunnel, just give us a few more troops, give us some more weapons. And he didn't want to go against that until it was disaster.
And I think that, there's that famous line when he took over for JFK, and he said he was going to press on with Civil Rights Act. And someone said, you're going to spend all your currency on that. And they argued against it. And he said, who was it? It was a big name. It was Abe Fortas. Abe Fortas said, this was on page 311. Why would you want to spend your limited capital? This is like the day after JFK was assassinated. Why would you want to spend your capital? And he says, well, what the hell is the presidency for? He had the conviction and the core domestically to overrule his advisors. And I guess with foreign policy, he didn't have that conviction. And so he didn't have the ability to overrule his advisors. He didn't have that conviction, and he listened to them. And that was part of the problem. Any other thoughts? I'd love some voices who we haven't heard from. I'm going to go to my next screen just to make sure that I hear everybody who wants to share reactions to this chapter before we pivot to some Jewish sources. Any other reactions to the LBJ chapter? Can I just get a quick say? Oh, yes, David Kopelman.
Yeah, in response to the issue of why he wasn't involved in foreign policy, I think part of it may stem from the fact that he himself was so invested in the domestic policy, equal opportunity for all, because he personally had suffered those injustices himself. He grew up in poverty. He had to fight for his education like Lincoln did. And there was that empathy because he himself experienced it. He didn't have that same empathy when it came to the military. I don't think he served in the military. So his focus was on something that was innate to him, something that he had personally suffered from. Whereas the international sphere, he hadn't been involved in it. He hadn't suffered any consequences. That's one reason.
Yeah, and you know, when you put all of this together, the whole book together, you know, what seems so clear now reading it as a history book instead of living through it is that a better move for him, since he didn't have that personal empathy or that personal feel for military, is to have surrounded himself with a team of rivals on the military front, like a lot of different people who had different perspectives instead of just the generals, as he did. If I were to ask you an unfair question, you know, which is of these 4 chapters on the pivotal moments they faced in the White House, which one did you find the most dramatic, the most urgent, the most compelling? How would you rank the chapter on LBJ? Now that is our 4th one. So how would you rank the chapter on LBJ? Dottie?
With Emancipation Proclamation before him, with Abraham Lincoln, and what you think about it, and Teddy Roosevelt with the strikes and the whole thing, and what Franklin Roosevelt did. I think LBJ, I think in 1 year, when President Kennedy was killed, there was only 1 year left. He followed his policy, and what he got done with the voting rights, with the housing rights, it was unbelievable. I think in modern history that he was my favorite. I didn't care for Vietnam. He didn't know anybody. He didn't want him to go down in history as a flop in international relations, which I think he had no background. He was a man for our country.
Yeah.
He's the Great Society, I think, is exactly what he did. I was very impressed with him. I thought it was a wonderful chapter.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this whole book, I was telling my daughter this morning that I don't want the book to end. It's like it's like you've got a package of bonbons and you're saving the last bonbons. I don't want the book to end because every chapter that I read, I say, oh my God, it can't get any better than this. And this chapter, just the fact that he could contain multitude. There's also just little pearls, like nothing convinces like conviction. You know, when he talked about to David Kopelman's point earlier, that he had a feel for domestic, and he had a feel for poverty, and when he was able to talk about the plight of the Negro, as he called it, you know, that the problem that there's not a Negro problem and there's not a South problem, there's an American problem, and he was and it was so well received that there's nothing that convinces like conviction. It was just like, oh, it's just so beautiful. And by the way, it feels like he had such a big meeting. If everyone could turn off their mute if you're not speaking. It was amazing that he was able to have such an impact on ordinary Americans' lives with all that legislation. That's the country that we have all been living in since 1964 is the country that he disproportionately shaped through those less than 2 years of legislation. Amazing. Any last comments before we pivot to our Jewish connection here about LBJ or about how this ranks with anyone, you know, any of the others? And feel free, if I'm not seeing you because of the chats of the limitations, feel free to chat and let me know that you want to talk, and then I will be happy to call on you. Yes, Harry. So good to hear from you, Harry. And if you could just unmute, please, Harry.
Who?
Yeah, Harry, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here. It's good to see everybody. This isn't mentioned in the book, but I remember LBJ very fondly. And to me, growing up, the big pivotal events was the 6-Day War. And Doris Kearns Goodwin doesn't write about this, but he really was a friend to Israel like no other. When the Russian Black Sea Fleet left the Black Sea and parked themselves off the coast of Israel to intimidate Israel, Johnson ordered the Sixth Fleet out of Naples, Italy, and they sailed to the coast of Israel, and they parked off the coast of Israel. He didn't threaten the Russians. He didn't say anything, but the fact that the US fleet was there with aircraft carriers, amongst other ships, that canceled out the Russians. And that sort of said to the world, we're going to back up Israel here. You know, we're not going to let anybody, do in Israel. And the Russians had their, combat Marines there. And, I think that really was something. And then when the United Nations, after the 6-Day War, was this great Israeli victory, and people forget, you think of Israel as being a regional superpower. Well, she wasn't at that time. And really, her existence was threatened. And even after the greatest miraculous Israeli victory, the United Nations would have had resolutions for Israel to just unconditionally withdraw. And Johnson made sure that he left out a little word, the. He let the United Nations have Resolution 242, which said that they should withdraw from occupied territories for peace, but he wouldn't permit them to put in the occupied territories. And it made all the difference. And Johnson said, I'm not going to make the same mistake that Eisenhower made after the 56 war. And, I think that, it gave Israel something to trade off for peace. And I think eventually that led to the peace with Egypt and the peace with Jordan. And now, relations with Morocco and Sudan and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and probably eventually Saudi Arabia too. And, this was all pivotal. And he was just, he would have gone down as such a great president had he not been misled by the Vietnam War. Even Doris Kearns Goodwin says, he was reluctant, but he listened to the wrong advisors. He thought that, he had the best and the brightest, and unfortunately, that changed everything.
Thank you. That was the pathos of his presidency. Well, that's actually a perfect segue. I think that's a perfect segue. The pathos of his presidency. This man who, had such a dramatic impact on the lives of ordinary Americans. And thank you, Harry, for your pointing out the salutary impact he had on Israel as well. And yet he goes down as such a complicated, equivocal figure because of Vietnam. So it made me want to step back and evaluate: is any political leader ever loved by everybody? Or are there just always ifs, ands, and buts about it? Are there always footnotes? Are there always asterisks? Because you would think, LBJ, so much to admire and what he did and how he did it. And he was so skilled, and his heart was in such a good place, and he had such an impact, and a Southerner who really helped unite the country. Oh my God, you got to love the guy. And then you have Vietnam and et cetera. So I wanted to step back and just ask this question: is any leader ever universally loved, especially at the time that they live and do their leadership. So I wanted to, you talk, Harry, about the word the, T-H-E. I want to focus that our text study, the Jewish text study, on one word as well. So take a look on page 1 and 2 of the handout. Page 1 and 2 deals with the death of Aaron. And you'll see that I'm going to read starting verse 28. Moses stripped Aaron of his vestments, put them on his son Eleazar, and Aaron died there on the summit of the mountain. When Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain, the whole community knew that Aaron had breathed his last. All the house of Israel bewailed Aaron 30 days. Shloshim Yom Kol Beit Yisrael, right? Vayivku et Aharon Shloshim Yom Kol Beit Yisrael. Vayivku et Aharon, they weep for Aaron, Shloshim Yom, 30 days, Kol Beit Yisrael, all of the Jewish people. So when Aaron dies, Kol, everyone mourns for him. Now take a look on page 3, and you get Moses's death. I'm reading from verse 7. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were undimmed and his vigor unabated. Vayivku v'nei Yisrael et Moshe. And the Israelites bewailed Moses in the steppes of Moab for 30 days. So when Aaron dies, it's Vayivku kol b'nei Yisrael. All of Israel dies. When Moses dies, it's not all. And the contrast between Aaron is mourned by kol, all, and Moses is mourned by not kol, not all. That could not be any clearer. Hold on a second here. Right, let me just get me back. Hold on a second here.
You're muted, Wes.
Okay, can you hear me now? See me and hear me? Yeah. So the question is, before we get into a textual analysis, I just wanted to tee up that question. And the text is very explicit that when Aaron dies, everyone mourns. When Moses dies, not everyone mourns. And because they're brothers, and because it's always Moses and Aaron, Moses and Aaron, Moses and Aaron, the Bible, the Torah cannot be doing that by accident. That is just a conspicuous statement that there was an asterisk, there was a footnote, there was a holdback when it came to Moses. Not all wailed. Some said, you know what, it's time already. But when Aaron died, every person, every man, every woman, every child mourned him. So before we take a look at that, which is to say that Moses is in good company, or to say that Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, and FDR and LBJ are all in good company. Not even Moses was loved by everybody. And none of these 4 presidents, great as they were, was loved by everybody. But the outlier here seems to be Aaron, who is loved by everyone. And my question is going to be, why? What is it about Aaron that Aaron attains a connectedness with the Jewish people that not even Moses has? So before we look at some textual research, let me just throw out that question. You're not strangers to Moses and you're not strangers to Aaron. Why would you think that Aaron was more loved than Moses? Anyone? Any takers on this one? And feel free also to add.
He never made.
Add function.
Oh.
Anyone? Judy Swartz.
Actually, Rabbi, I find that totally upside down. I don't think there's a comparison. We're going to talk Moses and Aaron, and this whole Kitisi thing, that whole drives me crazy. Moses was a leader. I feel Aaron should have been punished from the golden calf. I don't think the story, I think there's much more to the story that leads us to a lot of interpretation of what went on. And so if people, I don't think it's, I don't agree. I don't think, no matter what's written there, it doesn't make any sense that Aaron was liked. The liking doesn't make any sense. Moses is a leader head and shoulders above the kind of person Aaron was. Aaron just was, he kind of placated, he held back, blah, 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 blah. Moses took on all the hard decisions, all right? He had to be loved, they were afraid, they were disappointed. He had to keep cajoling them, come on, you can do this, and this is what the covenantal relationship is all about. He is way beyond as a person, whoever Aaron is. So there's a lot here that isn't, I don't think, appropriately explained. You need a gigantic amount of interpretation from where I'm sitting.
Well, Judy Swartz, I couldn't agree with you more. But again, don't blame me. I didn't write the Torah.
No,
I'm
no,
just
no, no, I'm
interpreting
not.
the Torah.
Just telling you, that's why I had to come on this morning. I was dying to hear what
Yeah.
you're going to say about this,
So,
because I have a problem with that whole situation.
Right. So let me just state that I'm just stipulating the Torah's assessment when Aaron dies, Kol B'nai Israel, Vayivku Kol B'nai Israel. When Moses dies, not everybody. And the question is why. Now, in the Eitz Chaim commentary, and I love and adore Harold Kushner, but I think what he does is not. I want to just name that. As to me, it's not very satisfying, and I'll tell you why. If you look on page 2 of the handout, where it says in the context of Aaron's dying, Vayivku et Aharon shloshim yom kol b'nei Israel, that all the Jews bewailed him. Rabbi Kushner writes, in contrast, later in Deuteronomy, we will read that Israelites, but not all Israel, bewailed Moses. And then Rabbi Kushner says, Moses, the voice of judgment, was respected, but Aaron, the peacemaker, was universally loved. Now, and Judy, you're pointing out that, you know, Aaron cannot hold Moses's candlestick when it comes to the quality and depth of his humanity and his quality as a leader. And of course, I agree with you, and anyone would agree with you. Thus, the question is a very bedeviling question. And I want to say what Rabbi Kushner is referring to, there's a midrash that if A and B were fighting, Aaron was a peacemaker, and Aaron would go to A and say, hey, B wants to make up with you. And Aaron would go to B and say, hey, A wants to make up with you. And then he would bring them together. That is a teaching in Pirkei Avot. That's rabbinic midrash. What I want to do, though, is heed the wisdom of Micha Goodman. Micha says that the best interpretation of the Torah is the Torah. The best interpretation of the Bible is the Bible. I don't like what Rabbi Kushner did in this footnote is shift genres. He brought in rabbinic commentary from Pirkei Avot to explain this conundrum in the Torah. And what I want to try to do is understand the Torah in its own context, which is look at the biblical evidence to interpret the Bible. So that is why I brought to you the story of the golden calf, where I think all of your questions, Judy, are all your points are very well taken. So we'll get to that in a minute. Did anyone else? I saw a few hands up, and then we'll look at the evidence from Kitisa. But I share your question, Judy. David Kopelman.
Maybe just the word Rachmanis. I mean, poor Aaron, he lost his 2 sons for stepping into the holy sanctuary for the sin of that. It seemed to be an overly punishing response. He dies young himself. He demonstrated human foibles. I mean, he acquiesced to the people's demands that they build a golden calf. So maybe Aaron was more human. It might be easier for all of us to identify with someone with foibles and faults than a godlike figure like Moses, who's perfect, who you can put on a platform, but you can never reach those heights. But Aaron, he's more human. He's got foibles, he's got weaknesses, he's suffered a lot. So I don't know, maybe he's easier to identify with rather than putting him on a pedestal like Moses. He's one of us. He's similar to us. We're subject to foibles and errors of judgment.
Well, David, I really love that. I mean, to use a term that's much in vogue now, Aaron, the stories about Aaron share his vulnerabilities. And sharing vulnerability always makes you feel more relatable and real than somebody who doesn't seem to share vulnerabilities. And maybe that's it, that here's a guy who suffered, here's a guy who lost his sons. We talked about this last week with President-elect Biden. He lost his daughter, he lost his wife, he lost his son, Beau, that maybe that sharing of loss and vulnerability made him beloved. Here's a guy who keeps, although Moses also had his own sorrows, as you know, with his kids. Okay, let's take a look at the evidence, the best biblical evidence on this question, which is the story of the golden calf. And just, it's obvious, you all know the story, and I'll just frame it by saying, I agree with everything everybody said. I agree with Judy's point that Moses here seems to display more leadership, and Aaron here seems to display less leadership. So then why is it that the Torah's verdict is Aaron is universally mourned? So page 4, just so that we're all on the same page. When the people saw that Moses was so long and coming down from the mountains, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us. For that man Moses, who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him." Now, pause. Well, the Israelites had just gotten the 10 Commandments.
Yep.
And it says, "I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt." And the next command is, "Don't make any graven images." Okay. So they just stood at Sinai and they just affirmed, "We don't do idols." Okay. And now the people come and they gather around Aaron and they say, where is Moses? We need a God. We need something tangible. Let's make an idol. Let me ask you, if you're Aaron, what do you do in the, and there's a mob, right? This is interesting about mobs. It's interesting about mob groupthink and mob violence. Imagine that there's not just like a reasonable person having a coffee with you or a Zoom with you, but an angry crowd that gathers around you. What do? You just marinate on that for a second. Let's see what Aaron does, and then I'll ask you what you would have done. So Aaron said to them, "Okay." Well, I'm just throwing in the okay. "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters, and bring them to me." And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears, brought them to Aaron. This he took from them and cast in a mold, made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be a festival of the Lord." Early next day, the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. They sat down to eat and drink, and they rose to dance. Now, how would you assess Aaron's leadership in this moment of crisis? I mean, Doris Kearns Goodwin's whole book is about turbulent times. So this is a turbulent time. They've just gotten the Torah at Sinai. And now the people want to violate literally the first commandment. Don't make any, I'm the Lord your God. Don't make any idols. What should Aaron have done in that circumstance? Judy, what should Aaron have done in that circumstance?
Okay, so I have to ask you a question. Can we talk about the midrash that says Aaron was not alone, that he was with supposedly this guy, is his name Hor or Shor, and when Hor kind of talked up against these people, says the Midrash, they killed Hor. And that then explained why Aaron, to me at least, why Aaron gave in, because I thought that was horrendous what he did, because you didn't see him do any, he's supposed to be the peacemaker. He's supposed to be the guy that talks to these people. But then there's a whole question, who are these people? And when I learned from something else and was like shocked and said, yikes, I never realized this before. The whole, when we're in the Passover Seder, we never talk about there's another group of people that came with the Israelites coming out of Egypt. So these are supposedly not Israelites. And, these are another group of people, and they're the ones who did it. And now because Hor was killed, Aaron thinks he's placating them. Well, it's not a good, but he didn't, there's a missing here. There's no evidence other than he gave in, and he's going to let them do this kind of thing. And then we're going to worship when you can dance and you can do all kinds of horrible things. It doesn't make good sense to me. Not in the power that was supposedly vested in him, what he's supposed to be defending.
Okay, so what I hear you say, Judy, I mean, of course, the business about, Hor being killed by an angry mob is a midrash. It's not in the text, but it does seem to suggest that there is real fear of Aaron. Yep. And an inability to the people gathered around him. And this is a very real issue in our own society now. What do you do with the energy of the mob? What is a leader's role with regard to the energy of the mob? And what I hear you saying is Aaron is afraid for his own life, and he's trying to somehow, to put the best spin on it for Aaron, diffuse the situation. So I'm going to try to lower the temperature here and lower the chaos here, instead of challenging or engaging. Is there some other way? I mean, so that I think that's sensible that he's afraid of the anger of the mob. Is there some other move, some other alternative that one might have wanted Aaron to do in this moment? Penny.
Well, he might have identified some of the leaders in the mob, sat down with them one-on-one, figured out what they wanted, presented his reasons why he thinks that may not be a good idea, and try to gain some support. That's what our presidents have done. Right.
So, every person has his price, to quote Doris Kearns Goodwill and talking about LBJ. And the conversation with the leaders of this mob and et cetera. And he certainly does not do that. Now, the Torah's verdict, and you'll see the Torah is going to be pretty harsh on Aaron in a minute, but let's keep going. So the Lord spoke to Moses, hurry down, for your people, this is your child, your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have acted basely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I have enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf, bowed low to it, and sacrificed to it, saying, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. In other words, I think what God is saying here is this is not a minor technical violation. This is like you get married, you stand with your beloved under the chuppah, and you go to the gym at your hotel, at your honeymoon hotel, and when you come back to your room, your spouse is in bed with another person. This is not a technical violation. This is like a direct violation of the marriage. This is a direct violation. They're supposed to be married to me. You're supposed to be married to me, and you're in bed with a paramour. That's what this is. This is like major violation. The first commandment is, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. Don't have any other gods besides me. And what do? This golden calf is the one that took us out of Egypt. This is a major deal. So then the Lord further said to Moses, I see this is a stiff-necked people. Now, no, I want to talk about the quality of Moses' leadership. Now let me be that my anger may blaze forth against them and that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation. So in other words, this is relationship changing. This just violates everything. I'm done with this people. But Moses implored the Lord, his God, saying, let not your anger, Lord, blaze forth against your people, whom you delivered from the land of Egypt with great power. And then Moses makes all these arguments why God should not wipe out the Israelites. Let not the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountain and annihilate them from the face of the earth. Turn from your blazing anger, renounce the plan to punish your people Israel. So his first argument is, God, what are people going to say about you? You know, you've got an ego, you've got a reputation. If you kill these people, it's going to undermine your own reputation. Next, remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, how you swore to them by yourself and said to them, I'll make your offspring as numerous as the stars of the heaven. I'll give your offspring this whole land which I spoke to possess forever. So he invokes the merits of the ancestors, Zechut Avot. And then verse 14, the Lord renounced the punishment he had planned to bring upon his people. By the way, this verse should look very familiar to you because it's a recurring verse on Yom Kippur. I mean, we are always calling up this verse on Yom Kippur. Okay, so now how would you assess Moses right there, right? Give Moses a report card on his leadership in this turbulent time, to use Doris Kearns Goodwin's. What does Moses do, and how would you assess what Moses does? Anybody? And I'd love Judy.
Well, Moses, I think Moses is very aware that, remember, these people still have a slave mentality. And so he is very much the mature leader, and therefore he is going to beg God to forgive them, all right, and give them another chance. And that's why I say to you, he's heads and shoulders. He really is a leader, and he recognizes, without first having seen what's going on, that these people are, they're still stuck in slave mentality. I don't think he knows yet what they've done, but he says, we got to give them a second chance because of all those reasons. You promised them, you made the covenant with their fathers and what have you, and they have the potential. Because he says, if not, somewhere he says, if you don't do this, count me out. I'm not the leader that you asked me to be, all right? So he's going to plead for the people, all right? And he's going to forgive them, and he's going to have God see the same thing, all right? So that's unbelievable.
Unbelievable, right? So by the way, remember we have a question here, which is why don't all the people love Moses, and why don't they all weep? And here he seems to be
maturity
from central casting as the most heroic leader, because he advocates for them, he defends them. Again, I mean, God had said, hey, I'm going to make a whole new people out of you. It won't be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that are our forefathers. They'll all be Mosesites. And Moses doesn't want any part of that. He's egoless, not about him. It's about the people. Okay. He defends. Then what happens? Thereupon Moses turned, went down from the mountain, bearing the 2 tablets of pact, tablets written on their surfaces. They're inscribed on the one side, on the other. The tablets were God's work. The writing was God's writing, incised upon the tablets. When Joshua heard the sound of the people and its boisterousness, he said to Moses, there is a cry of war in the camp. But he answered, it's not the sound of the tune of triumph or the sound of the tune of defeat. It's the sound of song that I hear. And as soon as Moses came near the camp, saw the calf and the dancing, he became enraged. He hurled the tablets from his hands, shattered them. He took the calf that they had made, burned it, ground it to powder, strewn it upon the water, and made the Israelites drink it. Okay? Now, anything strike you about Moses? He has just been defending the people. He's just been making the case to God, don't kill them. Number one, your own reputation. It'll be reputational harm for you. Number two, the ancestors. And then as soon as Moses does that, what does he do then?
Now he's going to punish the people.
He challenges the people, right? So the ability to be able to be supportive of and defender of, and then a critic of, and a chastiser of, to issue support and rebuke, to issue defense and critique. That's a great leader. And here's what I want to, so, I mean, you know the rest of the story. And he then, by the way, he asked people to go, and I'm just going to read you one last verse. Look on page 10, and then we have to unpack this. He says to the Israelites, this is the very famous, verse. He says, Milad Hashem Eli, whoever is for the real God, come here.
Yep.
And
Yep.
the Levites rally. He said to them, thus said the Lord, each of you put sword on thigh, go back and forth from gate to gate throughout the camp and slay brother, neighbor, and kin. The Levites did as Moses had bidden, and some 3,000 of the people fell that day.
Yep.
So you see that what Moses does is really decisive leadership. By the way, just as the coda to this, and then we'll close the text and unpack it. When Moses confronts Aaron, right? So Moses has been both defender of the people, critic of the people, takes decisive action. Moses said to Aaron, why did this people do to you that you have, what did the people do to you that you have brought such great sin upon them? And Moses's critique is that Aaron is responsible. Aaron said, let not my Lord be enraged. You know, this people is bent on evil. They said to me, make us a God to lead us, for the man Moses who brought us from the land of Egypt. We do not know what has happened to him. So I said, whoever has gold, take it off. They gave it to me, and I hurled it into the fire, and out came this calf. Out came this calf as if it's not my fault. And then finally, Moses saw the people were out of control since Aaron had let them get out of control. So they were a menace to any who might oppose them. So the verdict of the text is that Moses takes decisive leadership and at the same time supports the people. And Aaron is kind of a weak leader, does not stand up. So that's the textual evidence about the difference between Moses and Aaron. Therefore, the question remains, why is it that all the people mourn Aaron, who seems to be a weak leader, does not take responsibility, and all the people do not mourn Moses? Does anyone have an elegant solution to this conundrum? Does anyone, when you look at the main story of the Bible, the contrast Moses and Aaron, this is the main story, the contrast Moses and Aaron, you really have a deeper question, because it would seem like Aaron is by far the worst leader, weak, doesn't, and Moses, it doesn't take responsibility. Moses is an amazing leader. So why are the reactions of the people opposite of what you would expect? David Kopelman. You're muted, my friend.
Maybe the failure to put into the Bible Kol B'nai Israel in the case of Moses's death, maybe it's just a typo.
Well, my dear friend,
No.
nothing in the Bible is by accident. I mean, these are the rules of the game. The rules of hermeneutics is that everything is for a reason, everything is for a purpose. So you would like to say, well, maybe they made a typo, but the rules of the game are no typos. So it has to be deliberate. So if you assume that it has to be deliberate, which is the hermeneutical rule, everything is for a reason. What is there any other explanation or any other lesson from this?
Well,
And then I've got one at the end. I've been noodling on this all week, and I will give you mine at the very end. Anyone else have an interpretation why the stronger leader is not universally loved? Maddie.
Well, sometimes the stronger leader says things that people don't want to hear or ask them to make decisions that are harder for them. And the leader that Aaron was, he gave the people what they want. It wasn't necessarily the best solution, but it gave them what they wanted. And it was sort of a Pollyanna response. Whereas Moses was a wonderful leader, but he was also the father. And sometimes the father says, no, you can't. And no, you shouldn't.
Yeah, I think, Maddie, that's one of my two answers. So thank you. That is to say, if you're really a leader, you will not be universally loved. And that goes with the territory of being a real leader. As Larry Backout puts it, you know, if you want to be loved, get a dog. But if you're going to try to run a university, you're not going to be loved universally, right? Like real exercise of real leadership in contentious times and contentious spaces like universities or countries or cities or synagogues or schools or companies or right, you name a real human organization which has people and multitudes and conflict. If you're going to exercise real leadership, getting people to confront the real issues that they have, you're not going to be universally loved. If you want to be loved, get a dog. And I think that is one of the things that's going on here. Moses, you know, for Moses to really be a leader, he's got to do stuff that is going to make him not loved. And, you know, and when now let's go back to our 4 presidents. For Lincoln to be Lincoln, he's not going to be loved, right? For FDR to be FDR and to reconceive government, he's not going to be loved. LBJ was considered a traitor to the South, a traitor to his own kind, not loved. So if you're going to exercise real leadership, you can't do that and be universally loved. I think that's one of the main points. The other one that I will just leave you with is, to me, it's a point about humility. I don't know about you, but I'm always amazed at how I cannot read anything correctly in terms of public mood. I never really get what makes people tick when it comes to public issues or voting or whatever. And to me, there's a whole point about humility here. That is to say that despite, we look at Moses and think, what a leader. And we look at Aaron and think, what a lacking leader. And yet the people who vote here, the biblical Israelites, come down differently. To me, it teaches us humility, that to have humility, when you think about reading a group's think, that there's just a lot we don't know and we'll never know. And we should be circumspect about gauging others' views. So those are, that was to me the big text that leaped to my mind reading LBJ, who was both so accomplished and so terrible in the same person. He contains multitudes. The country that he led contained and contains multitudes. A lot of wonderful complexity. Let me give you a assignment and a second assignment. The assignment is the last chapter of Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, which is the epilogue. What happens to these 4? Of course, President Lincoln is assassinated, as you know, and FDR dies in office, as you know. But what does the epilogue look like for these 4 leaders, including the 2 who survived the presidency? And that's going to be our last chapter of Doris Kearns Goodwin. But here's the next thing that I want to ask you to think about. So, because next week is our last one on that. I want to ask you to think about, and I'd love to have a little conversation next week about it, and that'll be our last class before winter break. For when we resume in 2021, here's a book that I invite you to consider, but this is a conversation and a collaboration, not an imposition, and I'll be happy to take the group's wisdom. Number one, do you like this model of reading a book and pairing it with, kind of like a wine and cheese pairing? You know, it's a wine and cheese pairing. You read a secular book and it will inevitably connect with Jewish themes, and we do a wine and cheese pairing of the secular book. Or would you like just all Torah? And I'm happy to go either way. I happen to like this. I think you know, you get 2 for 1. You get the biblical text anyway, but you also get some secular learning, which bears. But if you do want to go with a secular book that we pair with some Jewish text, the one I'd like you to consider, and we'll have a conversation about it, look it up next week, is the book called Caste, C-A-S-T-E, by Isabel Wilkerson. All I can tell you is if you read the New York Times review of Caste, I'm paraphrasing now, but the New York Times review of Caste basically says in the first paragraph, this is a paraphrase, but it gets at the essential point. I'd never read a review like this. There are two essential books in the Western canon that any literate person must read today. The first is the book of Genesis, and the second is Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. So I haven't read the book yet, but it deals with how we understand race and racism in our country. And I'd love, so you take a look at it, Google it, consider it, and let's talk about it, because again, conversation not and collaboration, not imposition. If a strong majority of the class supports that, I'd love to read Caste with you a chapter at a time with a Jewish text. And if a strong majority of the class does not want to do that, then we'll do something else as well. So thank you so much, guys. We'll see you. So next week, the epilogue of Doris Kearns Goodwin's book and your wisdom about our next chapter, our next book beyond that. Thank you so much. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. Thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Hanukkah to
Great
all.
discussion.